Look, let's get started. There's probably a few more that will join as we progress, but that's okay. Busy. So, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for the April 2025 RR-CLaN seminar. My name is Dr. Alex Stevens. I'm the Director of Research at Northern New South Wales District. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Professor Steve Kamper, and Steve will lead us through a presentation on research questions to study design. To officially get us started, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waters where we work and live. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the culture, their connection to country, and their contribution to the life of this region. We pay our respects to the ancestors and elders of the region and to all Aboriginal people, past, present, and future, and any Aboriginal people. So, welcome. Just a big shout out to our sponsors, the University Centre for Health, for this really continued support. Just a little bit about the RR-CLaN. For those of you who have attended a previous session, you probably know by now. We are a large collaborative spanning 2 states, New South Wales and Queensland. This doesn't necessarily mean that we restrict attendance to these seminars to the member organisations in those 2 states, and we know organically our comms reach far and wide, and if there's anyone joining us outside of our member organisations today, welcome. If you have missed any previous RR-CLaN seminars or want to revisit them, we record all of our sessions and we upload them to GitHub and YouTube channel, so you can use that link there that we've noted to access them, or you can just Google RR-CLaN YouTube and find the channel. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We tend to have fairly large attendances, so please keep your microphones mute if you can, although for you. We're also recording the session, like I said. If you don't want to appear in the recording, just turn off your camera. But please do ask questions. So, like I just said, man muted. If you do have any questions you want to ask throughout the seminar, please use the chat function and we'll try to get to them. Also, what we usually try to do is towards the end of the session is open up the floor for live questions. Now, without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Steve Kamper. So Steve is Professor of Allied Health at the University of Sydney and also an PhD. Steve likes research, football, and football team building. Steve. Steve is a physiotherapist by training and is ranked top 10 researchers in the world in musculoskeletal pain, back pain, and physiotherapy. He has authored over 200 peer-reviewed publications, including the top-ranked journals, and received greater than $6 million in competitive research funding. Steve's work underpins clinical practice guidelines globally, and he is regularly invited to present at conferences, clinician education meetings, science outreach events, podcasts, and online interviews. So, Steve, if you can steal back the screen, I'm going to hand over to you, and I look forward to this wonderful presentation.
Right. Working out a few details.
That's come through. So
there we go.
Yeah, good. Okay. Thanks, Steve. Over to you.
Cool. Is that the right view?
From my perspective, yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everyone, for coming along. Hopefully, we're going to get something useful out of this. We'll have something useful out of this for you. Some of this will, if some of you came along, I gave a presentation on research questions last year, and some of this will overlap with that. I'll extend things a little bit further in this talk. I'm hoping, and I think it probably won't do any harm if you did see the last one. So I get started by also acknowledging the owners of the lands where I live and work, and they're the Darugundungra and Wiradjuri people. So where we're going to go today, sorry, not very good technologically. All right, so I'm going to start very briefly on what is research and science. So really going to go from the start with doing here. This is about research questions. I'm going to talk about what's before the question. And we're going to talk about what a good question looks like. We're going to talk about the types of research questions. Sometimes it's useful if you can categorize your question to help you understand it a little bit better. We're going to talk about how we link questions to study design. That's also, so I also author a series of papers which are aimed at breaking down the research process. They're all published in the Journal of Orthopaedic and Sports Physical Therapy. They all sort of hit on one discrete aspect. They're about 1.5 pages long, and they're designed for clinicians. If you are interested in getting hold of any of them and you don't have access, please just send me an email. I'll send you a PDF. So there are things which, the idea is really as references to help clinicians be more successful users of research evidence. What I'd like today, how I'm hoping today will work is for you to do a little bit of a bit of activity in the background. So what I'm going to do, this little for you to do is going to come up on several slides. And what we're going to do is have you build your own research questions. I'll say up front, there's nothing writing on this. You don't have to do the study afterwards. Doesn't have to lead anywhere. But I think going from my experience going through the process will help you clarify some of the aspects and things I'm talking about. It'll help you understand a little bit better, more about study design. So if you're like me and Philistine, I'm hoping you have a pad and a pen. If you're a bit more technologically apt, maybe you have a Word file or something open. If you're even better, maybe you do it on your phone. But what I'd really like you to take the time. I'm going to have little breaks along the way. And what I'm hoping is you can just put a little bit of thought into a question for yourself. Okay, let's get going. So what is research? And this is a quote that I really like from Tim Minchin. Some of you have probably seen his talk. And I think it gets to something really important. People have this idea that science is a body of knowledge or a system of belief. Not. Just a process. Okay, it's a series of steps that we use to structure observations and understand the world a little bit better. So that's a really important point, in my opinion. So here's a more formal definition of research itself. So a series of steps used to collect and analyse information. This idea of information I'm going to keep coming back to. And that is information to increase our understanding of a topic or issue. This is really the steps. Okay, the steps are to define a question, to say how we're going to collect and analyse data, and to say how we're going to interpret and report it. And that's going to answer the question. All right. And if we really get simplistic about it, that's what study design is. Okay, but it all starts with the question. I think sometimes people have an idea that research needs to be more complicated than it actually is. Sorry, was there a question in terms of what it is that I'm sharing? Should I have some other thing up?
No, we can see it, Steve. This person needs to maybe just check their screens because we can see it.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Thank you. All right. Yeah. So that's what we're talking about. The study design is really just about outlining what the question is, how we're going to collect and analyze the data, and how we're going to interpret. All right. So, and yes. Next. All right. But as I said, there's something before the question. And before the question is the problem. So what's a problem? A problem is something that's giving us grief that we want to change. Here's the definition out of the Oxford Dictionary. You all know They're all familiar with problems in your personal life, problems in your work life, problems in all other bits of your life as well. Something that's not going well and that you want to change. And when we're talking about research embedded in clinical practice, we can think about a problem in that way. What is it that's going wrong that you want to change? Now, if we go next then to the question, so that's a sentence worded or expressed to elicit information. And research, here's that definition that we had before. And this is the link here, all right? So the information, so we need, the question is what elicits the information. Here we have it here. So this is what the question is getting at. It's what information is going to help you solve the problem. Right. Now, there are all sorts of problems that you might face in your work. There are clinical ones, so I don't know how to treat patient A or patient B. There might be workflow problems. I have a really long waiting list. I don't know how to get all my patients in one day. You might have administrative problems with bookings or referrals. The idea here is, what is the problem? You need to have a really clear sense of what your problem is before you can decide what it is your question is. Okay, so not even starting with the question, here's something for you to do, and I'm going to give you a minute and a half for this. And what I want you to do is think about a problem that you have in your work. And there may be a couple of problems. Write them down, even if you write 3 or 4 or 5 of them, or 1, whatever it is. So something that's not going well for you at work at the moment, write them down. Don't worry about a question at the moment. Don't worry about research at the moment. Just what are the problems? So have a bit of a go at that, and I'll give you a minute or so just to jot them down. You don't have to think in too much depth about it. All right, hopefully you got a few down there. Now, what you might have found is that problems tend to be a bit messy. The good ones are anyway. And that's because the problems that are simple and straightforward don't stay problems very long. Right? So the problems that we face tend to be messy and complicated. So that's the nature of the beast here. What that means in practice is it might take more than one piece of information to solve your problem. Now, generating more than one piece of information means answering more than one question. Right? So all that means is there may be several questions that you need to ask in order to solve your problem. And so those what you might come up with when we're defining a question is it might just relate to a part of the problem. So the question might be about describing or mapping the problem. So how big is it? How many patients have diagnosis X? It might be about understanding needs. If patients are not turning up, why is it that they're not? It might be about designing a solution. So what components need to be part of whatever your solution is? It might be about testing a solution. So do we know that our solution is more effective than what we were doing before? It might be about the process of change, how we go from doing things one way to doing things another way. So all this is to say is that often in the context of the problems you face, there may be several questions which are important and relevant, and we need to tease them out. In order to design a good piece of research, we need to have a specific question. All right. Apropos of that, I talk a lot about good questions and why is that so important. And it's because of this. This might sound a little bit harsh or alarmist, but it's the reality. If a piece of research does not start with a good question, everything afterwards is a waste of time. I'm 100% sure none of you are sitting around at work trying to find things to do. You all has better things to do than waste your time on stuff. Some of you probably feel like you waste your time on some of the things that you have to do. Don't waste your time on doing research or QI activities that are not going to get you a good result or worthwhile information. And in order for that to happen, you have to have a good question. All right, why is that? One, if you don't have a good question, whatever information that you generate from it will not meet your needs. It will not get you closer to solving your problem. Secondly, other people who read about what you've done won't be able to interpret and use your information because your question isn't clear. All right, so this is the thing. Bad question, bad study, always, 100% of the time. Right? So this is the case for if you are designing or proposing or want to do some research. It's also the case of when you're reading research as well. If you don't understand the research question, or if the question is not clear, or if it is a poor question, don't bother reading the rest of that study. You will not get useful information. The research literature is littered, and so this has nothing to do with understanding research methods. Okay, the research is littered. Literature is littered with studies of very sophisticated and clever statistics that don't answer a worthwhile, specific, and important question. Right, so the method doesn't make up for a good question. You need to be clear of that. Even if it is a good question, but you just don't understand it for some reason, there's still no point in reading on, right? Because you cannot interpret that information separately. So a good question really is the foundation here, and without it, we're a bit stuffed. Here is a picture of some other important and interesting people who like good questions too. What does a good question look like? So a good research question, it's specific and focused. And we're going to dive into these a little bit in more depth on the next slide. But it needs to be specific and focused. It needs to be clear. It needs to be answerable. And it needs to be relevant or important. I only just noticed as I was writing that I could have made an acronym SCAR out of that. So a good question leaves us. Missed opportunity. All right, so let's dive in a little bit deeper to this. So, specific and focused. And the first thing here is there just one question? Nearly everyone starts out with questions that are too vague and too broad when you first have a go at it. And in my experience as a supervisor, that conversation that I have with a new PhD student, a new master's student, a new honours student, the questions that they come with are nearly always too broad, too vague, and need to be specified. And there's more than one question. The other part of this, which is important, is that is the meaning of all the words unambiguous? Or is there only one way that you could understand what's been written? So we can start to think here. Actually, it's more than just vomiting out some words or something which is a bit hazy. We really need a question which is really specific. The words matter in it. They need to be chosen really carefully. These sorts of things in questions, and we're trying to understand something, we're trying to look for something, we're trying to explore something. They don't really work in terms of questions unless you've got something which is a qualifier, right, or something which is making what you mean by explore or look for clear in a after a colon or something like that. So you really need to use precise language, precise words when you're writing. It needs to be clear, and this is I think a nice little test that you can use from your question. So if you were to to outline your question to your partner, friend, parent, child, would they understand what you're doing? And probably if a layperson doesn't understand it, they might not understand why it's an important question, but they should understand what you're doing. And so it's that sort of level of clarity that we need to be aiming for. Is it answerable? And I'm hoping some of you might have gone to Andrew Bailey's talk last month about measurement. And so, and I don't have time to dwell on. There's lots that goes into measurement. We won't be covering that today, but we need to know that you can gather the data, which is going to enable you to answer the question. And this is a key one. Is it relevant and important? And again, as a sort of test, you can ask yourself, once I have this information, how's it going to help me? What am I going to do with it? How's it going to get me closer to to solving the problem that I specified before? All right, so I'm going to give you another 2 minutes now, and you can guess what I want you to do. Have a little go at writing a specific, clear, answerable, and relevant, important question or questions which relate to the problems that you specified before. Well, if you want to come up with a new problem, that's okay too. But I'd like you to have that link. And again, there's no, you won't be marked on this. There's nothing at stake. Just have a crack at it. And I'll give you a minute and a half for that. Okay, hopefully you jotted something down. Now, one of the nice things about research questions is that all the good ones fit into one of three pretty neat categories. So the question might be descriptive. So what does the landscape look like? And we might paint that landscape in numbers in quantitative research or in words and themes in qualitative research. We can ask predictive questions. So this is, I've got some information now. Does that or can that tell me something about what's going to happen in the future? And we can ask causal questions, and that's, does X cause Y? So some examples. An example of a descriptive question is the questions around prevalence. So that's telling us something about the landscape of, in this case, people with obesity. What proportion of them also have diabetes? We can ask predictive questions. So you might have a screening questionnaire that you could deliver to, or that you could apply in aged care settings. You might want to know whether a particular score on that questionnaire is going to predict whether someone's going to end up in ED over the next 1 month or 3 months or 12 months or whatever. So that's prediction. Causal questions fall into two main buckets. One is looking at, does a particular clinical or lifestyle or personal feature increase the likelihood of a particular outcome. So this might be an example. If you have poor sleep, are you more likely to fall over? But is it the sleep which is causing the falls risk? And there's that subtle difference between predictive research and causal research in these cases. Here we're saying it is the sleep which causes it. The other type of causal research, which you'll be familiar with, is essentially around treatment effectiveness. So if we do one thing, does it change the outcome compared to if we did something else? So, yeah, all right. So have a little look at your questions now. I'll just give you 20 seconds. Which ones do you think, which bucket does your question fit into? Can you fit it into a bucket? Is that hard? Is that easy? Do you think it might cross a couple? Because this can give us an indication that there might be a bit of an issue. We might need to specify it a little better. All right. So now we're going to go a little deeper into some of the information that needs to be in your question. Now, regardless of what type of question you're asking, descriptive or predictive or causal, you always need to say who the study population is. So who's this about? So you need to have some information in there which is saying these are the people that I'm interested in when I that the information relates to. All right. So for descriptive questions, you need to include something about what it is that you want to describe. So whether that's the prevalence of something, like in the last example I gave you, it was prevalence of diabetes. You might want to describe the symptom course of people with a particular condition. You might want to describe the attitudes or beliefs of a particular group of people with relation to something. So this is really about which bit of the landscape in that population do you want to paint. Right, so that's for your descriptive questions. Predictive questions, you need two important bits. You need the predictor. So what is it that you used? What is the information that you have now? That might be a clinical feature or a test. It might be a disease marker. It might be something about the person. And you need to know what it is that you want to predict. That's the outcome. So you want to predict recovery. Do you want to predict length of stay? In the last example, ED presentation, for example. So that's, if you've got a predictive question, you need that sort of information. All right, if we've got a causal question, depending on which type it was, you need the factor of interest, and epidemiologists call that an exposure. There were lots of epidemiologists in COVID. They've all disappeared again now. You don't need to worry too much about the terminology, but it's what is the thing that you think causes the outcome, all right? And so that might be, as in the previous example, sleep, might be body weight, genetic marker, whatever it is. In the other type of causal research, the treatment effectiveness questions, you need to say what your intervention is and what you're comparing it to. So that might be a new treatment versus usual care. And then your question also has to include the outcome too. So what is it that you want to change, or that you think the exposure or the treatment will be changing? So have another go at your question. I'm going to give you 2 minutes for this one. And see if your question, give it a tweak. See whether you got all those things in your question, and if you don't, what changes might you need to make that? Okay. Now, a quick little bit on logistics of things. And this is what comes to when we move from having our question to actually doing the study. So we've got our 3 types. Now, in practice, nearly everyone wants to do 3. Everyone wants to know about the causes of things. 2's a bit harder than people think. And oftentimes when we've got pretty limited time, space and capability, only number 1 is feasible. But there's some practical things that, again, for the purpose of this, we don't need to worry too much about. So, as I said up front, one of the things we want to do now is think about this link between the question and study design. So I'll just take you back to the little schematic that I put up before, and say that this is what I mean about study design. It's really saying what's our question, how are we going to collect and analyze the data, and how are we going to interpret and report. And this is it's kind of the secret about research. It's a research study is just a machine to answer a question in as unbiased a way as possible. Why do we do that? And it's to generate useful information. And so the key words here, the key things that we're looking at is this idea of bias and the fact that it's useful. And so the ways that we collect, analyze, and interpret data are the study design techniques, which ensure that we have as little bias as possible in our data. Data or information which is unbiased is much more likely to be useful to solve the problems that we have. And so that's the sort of how all this links up. So now we've got a couple of components of study design, and we've also got that relate to how we set up our study. All right, so study design. So we need to know who you'll collect your data from, right? And that's the population of your sample. We need to know what data you'll collect. So they're the outcomes. They're all those things that, the nice part here, as I said, if we've specified our question well, we kind of know who the population is. We kind of know what the outcomes are, and we also know what those other bits of data, the variables, the predictive variables, what it is that we're going to use to describe our sample, those sorts of things as well. What we're doing here as we design the study is just we're getting much more specific about all these things. So we're thinking then, how are we going to recruit the people from the population into our study? So that's how we're going to generate our sample. How are they available to us? How are we going to reach them? How are we going to get them to be in the study? Then we want to know how are we going to collect the data? What are we going to use to measure our outcomes, for example? We also need to know when we're going to collect the data. If we're doing an intervention, a comparative effectiveness study, we need to define our interventions. We also want to say how we're going to analyze our data. Ideally as well, in our protocol, we want to say how we're going to interpret our data. Oftentimes we don't do that in protocols, but it's a really good practice. So it's really taking that next step and saying, well, assuming I get data, information which looks like this or like that, how is it that I'm going to interpret and use those data? Right, so they're all the things that go into our protocol. So this is really taking our question and adding some meat on the bones. So getting specific about, we've got our population. How am I going to recruit them? How am I going to get them into my study? We've got our outcomes. How am I going to measure those outcomes? When am I going to measure those outcomes? How am I going to analyze those data? How am I going to interpret? So what I'd like you to do is again, go back to your question, and I'll give you another minute or so, and just have a think about some of these things. You've got your question. Who are the people that you need to recruit? How are you going to recruit them? Can you contact them? Can you get them into the study? Okay. So there are lots of different types of research questions that we might be interested in. Here's, I guess, kind of a smattering of some of the ones that are a little bit more common, and they relate to the sorts of problems that you might be trying to solve in practice, or things that you may be reading about in the literature. And just for completeness, as I said, what we can do is we can categorize all these types of research questions into the different types. Just briefly, things get a little bit difficult here. Some complexity around that I won't go into at the moment. But generally, they're the sorts of questions that we're in here. And these different sorts of questions go along with some particular design characteristics of studies. And so if we are looking at prevalence question, we might be thinking about a population survey. We're looking at risk factors. If we want to, so we're looking then at the relationship between something at one point in time and an outcome later. So we need a longitudinal study. Diagnostic test accuracy, we need a cross-sectional study because we want to know whether our test is telling us about that person at that point in time. If we want to know about clinical course, so what happens to people symptom-wise over time, again, we need a longitudinal cohort. If we're talking about treatment effectiveness, we need a controlled study, or one of particular type of which is an RCT, or randomized controlled trial that you might have heard of. If we're thinking about patient or clinician experiences, then we might want to use interviews or surveys. There's a couple of key considerations, and it's certainly not all of them, but they're really important ones, and things that I think are worth thinking about. One is, do you need to collect data at one point in time, or at several points in time? So one way we describe that is it cross-sectional data, or is it longitudinal data? Do you need data from one group of people or from two groups of people that you're comparing? And is your data what we call observational, or are you manipulating things? So are you collecting data from what is happening out in the wild, or are you going to intervene to do something to one group and something else to it? So what I get you to do is, again, have a think about those last three considerations there and see if you can think about how you might, what decisions you would make regarding those considerations with respect to your questions. Okay. All right. We've just got a couple of slides to round things up. A few tips for when doing this. As I mentioned before, your first go at a question is probably going to be too vague and or probably too broad. More than likely, very likely include more than one question. Okay, and this just speaks to the fact that defining a question is a skill, and it's something that takes a bit of practice. So having a crack at it is a good thing. Do it when the stakes aren't too high, but it does take some skill, and you can use I guess some of the tips that I gave earlier, asking yourself, is it specific? Is it clear? Is it answerable? Is it relevant? One of the things that, so in my role at Nepean, one of the jobs that we do in our team is field questions from clinicians who are interested in doing a study, a QI study, a research study. And often individuals will come to me and say, I've got this idea for a study, but they don't have an idea for a question. Right? And so what I would encourage you to do is talk to people about your question, not about your study. But get your question right first. So sometimes we talk about I have people come to us with say I want to do a survey, or I want to do a Delphi study, and then the question is sort of secondary, right? So there's sort of a question then a method in search of a question. But what you want to do is it the other way around. Don't worry about how you're going to collect the data. Worry first about what your question is. Don't do that on your own. Talk to people about your question. There are lots of useful questions that can be answered with data that's already available or simple survey. So research which is useful at a local level doesn't have to be complicated or difficult all the time. Often there's already data around that you can use which is useful to you. People get very worried about data analysis and stats. It's usually simpler than you think. The issue is that only becomes clear when you really know what your question is. So don't get too hung up on whether or not you can do stats. Concentrate first on getting a really nice, clear question, and you probably find that the stats part of it falls into place more easily than you thought it would. So a final word, it's not a final word, I've got another slide, but all right, so this is just, I guess, a little bit of a wrap of what we've been through today. So the goal of Research QI is to generate information related to a question that solves a problem in your practice. And so really what we need to do is you need to know what the problem is first, and you need to be able to draw a really clear line between your question and the problem. Did this before as well. It doesn't matter how much you know or don't know about research design if you don't have a good question. Right? All that knowledge in the world is wasted without a good question. Hope we've started to get the idea that the question feeds directly to the study design. And actually, with some practice of doing this, what you'll find is that study design makes pretty intuitive sense, but only when you've got a really clear question. Don't be afraid to have a crack and do something small, but don't do it alone. And I'll leave you with this. And I went through this last year for those, a repeat, I guess. And it's this myth that people come and are worried that research is all about statistics. It's not. Research is all about good questions. People are worried that research is only worth doing if it gets published. Not. It's worth doing if it has an impact, if it makes a difference to what you do day to day. And we have an issue sometimes. We think research and practice live in separate worlds. That's a choice that we make, and they can live in the same world. They can be integrated if we bring the right people with the right skills together to do research in practice. It's possible, but we just need to work together to make it happen. That's all I had. Thank you very much for your time. Alex will probably ask you this, but please do take a couple of minutes to fill in the evaluation survey afterwards. It's super useful to us. This is how we decide what we deliver. I'm a big boy. If you hated this, please tell me, if only to spare me the embarrassment of delivering it somewhere else. If you loved it, that's good for my ego too. But yeah, love to hear more. And yeah, I'll hand back to Alex. I'll stop sharing and hand back to Alex now.
Yes, thank you very much, Steve, on a very informative presentation. I'll share my screen and go through a couple more slides at the end here. Just probably a couple of reflections from me. I can't overstate the importance of some of the key messages that Steve's talk around really taking the time to develop your research question. I reflect on overseeing a research office here, I get many research proposals come through the office and on my desk. And probably the area where they fall down the most is right at the beginning. People do not take the time to ask an answerable research question. And they're kind of like Steve was saying, once that's not right, the rest of the flow, it's almost impossible. And it's a lot of work to backtrack. So yeah, the foundational principles around getting the research question right is so fundamentally important. And using those key elements that Steve mentioned, particularly around something like a PICO framework, where you're defining the population, the comparative, the outcome, the exposure, intervention, is a very straightforward framework to be able to do that. And then it leads successfully to the rest. As Steve mentioned, I've just put in a link to the evaluation. We always run evaluations for our presenters. It's just a nice quick thing to do. Also, take the time in there. There's a few open-ended response questions where you can, as Steve mentioned, stroke his ego or tell him you got everything wrong, or you can actually take the time to propose things that you would want to see in future seminars. So they're all basically useful ideas for us to figure out what we're going to do next. We've got a little bit of time for questions. I just want to highlight the next seminar, which we're going to do next month, which will be presented by Dr. Chantal Duffy. The seminar follows on very nicely from what Steve presented today. It's from idea to action, developing a study protocol. And Chantal is also from the LHD, is an accredited exercise physiologist and the research governance and development manager. All right. We have time for questions, probably 5 to 10 minutes. Does anyone have anything they want to ask Steve while you've got him? If you do, just put your hand up and we'll go to you.
Can I just say a few people asked for the slides. The presentation will go up on YouTube, so you're welcome to access it there. If you really want the slides, I'm happy to send them to you as well. So just send me an email. And I can send them there if you want.
And if you're happy to, Steve, what we usually do is we share the slides or provide a PDF copy to all those that registered. So all of those which are in attendance today, and also all of those that registered but can't attend will get a copy. All right, I've got one question, Karen Neaton.
Hi, I thank you for the presentation. I have a project in its early infancy that I am planning, so it was good to have that in my mind. So I was thinking about that project as I was following along, and what I noticed is that it was causal, and then descriptive. So does that mean that I need to tweak that descriptive part of the plan because it's sort of not in alignment? Does that make sense to you?
So I think what you want to think about is whether you've got one question or two or more questions, whether they're different questions that you're trying to answer. Okay, so or because that questions should a question should fit into one of those three and not more.
Okay, so
it's more than possible that you have more than one question, and that's actually quite likely, as I said. The problems that we're trying to deal with tend to be really messy and difficult, and they're complex by nature. Otherwise, they would have gone away by now. So there are almost certainly several questions which relate to that problem.
Okay, so in relation to then like how we collect the data, there was that, you know, like the so for example, if we're collecting the experience, it's descriptive, but treatment effectiveness is causal.
That's right.
Right. So yeah.
Yep.
So my problem, I thought, and the question was causal, but when I was looking at the data I was collecting, I was actually collecting experiential data.
Yeah.
So there was a mismatch. Is it not going to line up as I'm looking at it on paper?
So the issue, if I understand you correctly, is if you're asking about asking people about their experience, that information has fairly limited capacity for telling us about the causal effects of treatment. Okay, so that information is very good and is perfect, and it's the ideal information to tell you what people's experience is. But it's not so good about saying this intervention has an effect of this magnitude compared to something else.
Yeah, all right, yes, great, thank you.
We have another question from, sorry if I mispronounce your name, it is Obamneki.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I have a question.
Sorry, you're just very hard to hear.
Is it better?
Not really, I can't.
Can you flick your microphone down in front of your face?
Okay, let me see that.
No, the thing that's on your headset. You need to move the microphone down.
Your microphone is just right above your head at the moment. On your
above
headset.
your left ear.
Like that.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
There we go.
Beautiful. I forgot. All right. Thank you, Steve. I have a question regarding if someone is doing a feasibility study, which is not actually RCT, randomized controlled trial, and in other words, you're not checking for the effectiveness of the intervention. Where would you class this study? Would you still class it as causal? Question.
That's a good question. That's a really good question. And I've just been doing a feasibility study as well, and I've never thought about it in that framework. Can I take that on notice? That probably doesn't reflect very well on me, to be honest, but I very much appreciate the question. I'd be hesitant to answer it at this point in time. I feel like I need to think about that a bit more.
Okay. I'll be happy if you, I will be happy if you can get back, because I'm doing a study like that, and I just want to be sure. I mean, during thesis defense, what to answer. You know, Thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Good question, Leslie.
I don't think mine's going to be quite as curly for you, but probably a relief. But I just wondered if you had any advice towards designing your questions when it comes to things that research such as systematic reviews and scoping reviews and that, so where you're kind of trying to put a question together that's going to define something that's there's obviously a broad amount of information out there. Have you got advice in getting that question, narrowing it down so that you can narrow down into what you're looking at?
I mean, briefly, all the same principles apply to systematic reviews as they would to research studies that require primary data collection. So, you know, there are systematic reviews where the question is one of treatment effectiveness. So that's a causal question of treatment A versus control or placebo or whatever else. A scoping review tends to be more of the descriptive type. So what information about X is available? So I think, I'm not sure if I'm missing something important in your question, but essentially those same principles apply, whether the data source is studies which is published, or the data source is individuals who you're collecting data from.
So as you're starting to get those, so I'm only just thinking because I'm doing a review at the moment, and as a result of the literature's coming through, the question is kind of having to change and develop to match what's coming through. So do you have any advice in doing that, or do you just keep looking at what's coming through and kind of adapting that question around it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you need to sit down with the other people and say, well, what is it, the information that we want? So what's the question? I think you need to go back and specify your question a bit more firmly. And that will help you make decisions about what comes into your review and also how you interpret the information from those. To me, that suggests that you need more clarity around what your research question is.
Yeah. All right. Beautiful. Thank you.
No worries.
Beautiful. I think we're just about on time, so I might have to just leave it there and let Steve go back to his important day job. Just want to thank Steve again for the wonderful presentation. It was great following from Andrew's last week. We're going to have another one lined up in a month's time. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Hopefully you got something nice out of the presentation and you're continuing to learn on your research journey. Hopefully we'll see you in a month's time for Chantal's presentation. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon. See you next time.